Is alcohol dulling your potential? Is it getting in the way of you living your best life? These are the questions that my guest today, Amanda Kuda, has answered in her book, Unbottled Potential, and we dive into this topic in today's episode. It can be interesting to think about stopping alcohol if we don't have a problem with it. We often think that the only people who need to stop drinking are those who have addictions to it. But Amanda tells us today in the interview that we don't have to have a problem with alcohol to stop doing it. In today's episode, we confront different fears that might come up when we're dealing with thinking about letting go of alcohol or pausing alcohol. We talk about overcoming these fears, how to bridge conversations with loved ones, how to go on dates, and how to not see ourselves as this boring person without alcohol. I myself have been alcohol-free for several years now. I decided to stop during COVID, and I have a whole other podcast episode about my journey. But what was interesting was that I stopped drinking, and all of these things kind of came up for me, and Amanda was able to put words on these and to really encapsulate so much of how I was feeling on my journey that it was so validating to hear that I wasn't alone and that I wasn't crazy for thinking all of the different things that I was when I went alcohol free. A lot of these fears that came up, and even a lot of just discomfort or how to navigate this topic. So if you're curious about how your life would change if you went alcohol free, and if you're interested in learning a little bit more about how to navigate this potentially scary topic, you are going to love today's episode with Amanda Kuda. Hey everyone, welcome to today's episode of the Unlock the Sugar Shackles podcast. I am so thankful that you are joining me for another episode, and I'm super excited to bring on my in real life friend, Amanda Kuda. I met her at her book release party for Unbottled Potential, which is her brand new book. I read it, I listened to it on Audible. I seriously can't get enough of this topic, and I think that she speaks about it so beautifully, and it really is so inspiring. I feel that for so many of us, the thought of going alcohol free when it is so interwoven into our lifestyles can feel so daunting and so scary, and that we're going to somehow end up alone and boring and like dying alone. So it brings up a lot of stuff. However, Amanda talks about this and makes you feel so at peace with your decision and gives you so much hope and gives you so many tools to feel really ready to take on this new chapter or just dabble in this new area of being alcohol free. So I'm super excited for her book. I've linked everything in the show notes, and also for this amazing interview where you can hear from Amanda herself. I'm going to read you her bio because I want to make sure I get everything in. So Amanda Kuda is an alcohol-free lifestyle expert. She is a holistic life coach, speaker, and author, living, working, and playing in Austin, Texas. As a coach, Amanda helps ambitious, soul-centered women stop drinking and start manifesting the life they deserve and desire. She teaches a modern approach to personal development, self-actualization, and spiritual enlightenment through the lens of elective sobriety. Amanda's first book, Unbottled Potential, Break Up with Alcohol, and Break Through to Your New Best Life, is out now. I am super excited to bring you today's episode with Amanda. You are going to love her. Amanda, I am so excited to welcome you to the Unlock the Sugar Shackles podcast.
Oh my gosh, friend, I'm so glad to be here.
I connected with Amanda at her book release event, and she wrote a book called Unbottled Potential. I have my copy right here. I have my little red reading light on it.
Oh my God, I love
because
it.
I'm reading it at night. I also have the audiobook. I seriously cannot get enough of this book. And one of the main reasons, besides the fact that it is so well written, so easy to read, such a great I feel your personality comes through so beautifully, and I love to experience that. But one of the things is that I have gone alcohol free sort of during COVID. I decided, I'm like, alcohol doesn't really do well in my body. It tanks my HRV. I don't feel very good. And so I just sort of gave up drinking, and I've been having this whole experience that I haven't really thought of or talked about or investigated. And so many of the things in your book, you are just giving words and affirming an experience that I'm having. And it's just I'm like, oh my goodness, I didn't think of this, and this is how I felt. And it's so validating to read as someone who has given up alcohol for health reasons. And I know that a lot of people here on the podcast, a lot of my people who have low blood sugar, like, or who are on a health journey, or for whatever other reason,
Mhm.
have decided to give up alcohol. And I think that there can be a lot of stuff, a lot of things that come up. It can be isolating. We can have all these fears and doubts, which we can dive into. But tell us why taking a break with alcohol or breaking up with alcohol can be good for us, even if we don't feel like we have a problem.
Mhm.
Let's start there.
Yeah, let's do that. Danny, I think that one of the things you just said is really important that I want to touch on as to why I wrote this book is because there are so many things that we don't realize alcohol is connected to in our lives, and so many pieces of not only our physical health, but also our mental, emotional, spiritual health that get mired down or watered down by alcohol or diluted. And so what you're experiencing is you pulled alcohol out for a health reason to elevate your health, but you're starting to see maybe some of the things in your life start to feel different or strange or amazing or wonky. There's all of these experiences that we might not relate back to, oh, that was that way because I used to be a drinker. And so giving voice to that and helping draw your attention to it is really important. And I wrote a book because I quit drinking alcohol, geez, almost 7 years ago, with the intention to elevate my personal, spiritual, and emotional life. And not because I had a problem, but because I realized and I sensed, even though I didn't have any proof, that alcohol was getting in the way of all of that. And of course, we know that alcohol is a carcinogen. It's a toxin. I think we all learned that. I'm from the U.S. and I had DARE class in 5th grade, and they told us about alcohol. And then in like health class, they showed us a liver with cirrhosis. So they gave us all these fear tactics to remind us that alcohol wasn't good. We know that, but on some bigger level, we also got sold this like shinier social narrative that alcohol is sophisticated and it's sexy and it's fun and it's good for socializing and it's good for, kind of helping you through some stressful situations. And so we have these conflicting messages. And what we haven't heard is that how alcohol keeps us stuck in all of these other areas of our lives. And if you are someone who wants to be as abundant as possible, as expanded as possible, as successful as possible, as vibrant as possible, as creative as possible, and you're drinking alcohol on a frequent basis, it's definitely getting in the way. And so we can touch into all different facets of our health and how alcohol kind of impacts it behind the scenes. And that's kind of just like the basic, marketing ploy I would give to anyone who is either considering giving up alcohol, trying not to give up alcohol, but knowing they really should, or someone who already has and is kind of looking to investigate that a little bit more.
Yeah, that's so good. And I love that point about how it really waters a lot of things down in our
Mm-hmm.
life, and just this concept that it's not, you don't have to have a problem with it to stop doing it, yet
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of the narrative that we're fed. Like
Mm-hmm.
almost like you have to drink unless you are, falling apart, struggling with alcoholism, and it's the only drug that we have to explain that we're not doing. So
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to hear more about your story, because I think storytelling is so important, and
Mm-hmm.
just like what got you to the place, and what were the feelings, emotions, and things that were happening in your life that led you to this decision, and then how did it start for you? Like, what can you walk us through what that was like, even though I know your
Yeah.
story because I've read your
Yeah, it's
book.
all in there. I really go into the how and what and when of my story in my book because I do too love teaching through story. But long story short is that there's nothing remarkable about my relationship with alcohol. I was a run-of-the-mill social drinker who used alcohol mostly on the weekends as a way to look and feel more sophisticated, look and feel more relaxed, fit in with other people, feel less anxious and less overstimulated in social environments. And I will say though that I drank in excess. I definitely was someone who took a lot of pride in having kind of like a hollow leg. I could drink almost anyone under the table and still hold my own. So I wasn't drinking like in moderation, if you would really look at it that way. But I wasn't drinking at an abnormal rate either. My drinking very much was in alignment with every other young, successful, professional woman or even man at my age, and there wasn't anything that raised any red flags. I even remember at one point I asked my therapist if she thought that I should quit drinking, and she kind of went through the checklist that they do to diagnose someone with alcohol use disorder, and she was like, "No, you're okay." And that was so unaffirming to me because I felt in my soul that alcohol was somehow holding me back from the life that I was meant to live. And the reason I knew that is because I had just kind of started embarking on, this spiritual and personal development journey. I had had probably what would be qualified as an existential crisis and had started wondering, like, why am I here? And mind you, I'm 28 years old at this time. So I'm just having this, what is going on in my life? This isn't where I'm supposed to be. Shouldn't this be easier? Is this all there is to life? And around that time, I was introduced to a mentor who started to introduce me to some spiritual books and practices. And as I started reading these books, and mind you, I grew up in the Bible Belt, so I was only exposed to like traditional Christianity and religion, which is very different from New Age spirituality, because New Age spirituality is a little more open, a little more moldable and pliable to your own needs. And when I discovered this, it felt really good. It felt really good to have this possibility of a spiritual relationship, of my own understanding, and to have these self-help tools that felt a little more feminine and a little more empowering versus you have to have a strict schedule and like routines that a white man, a privileged white man developed for me. And all of a sudden I started to believe that there was something more. But the problem was, Danny, that no matter how many times I added something to my regimen, no matter how many yoga classes I took, journaling prompts I followed, no matter how many meditations I did, no matter how many breathwork exercises I participated in, no matter how many prayers I prayed, I still felt like I was only moving the needle just a little bit. And what I was reading in these books is that the needle was supposed to be moving really big. And I started to wonder if I was doing something wrong or if there was something like fundamentally wrong with me. And most of the books didn't say this outright, but some spiritual teachers kind of touched on it. And that is the possibility that maybe alcohol was in the way. And so I really didn't want that to be the answer because, alcohol is such a big part of my party girl persona, such a big part of my social life. But the more that I did the math, I had done all of the addition that I could possibly handle. So that left subtraction. And the only thing that was obvious that I could subtract was alcohol. And so painstakingly, I made the decision to remove it for 30 days for dry January back in 2017. And as the story goes, I never drank again. It started to feel so good. And I just kept adding on days to that 30-day challenge. And 7 years later, here I am.
Amazing. Amazing to hear this concept. And I think this is so important for what I teach too. And I almost posted something on this just the other day that you can add all the good food and all the good habits and lifestyle tweaks and biohacks, and you can add all those things. But if you are not taking out what is causing problems or making you sick or slowing you down or numbing your emotions or diluting your potential, then you will never move that needle that far forward. And I think that's such a good concept for so many of us. I mean, I can look at my life and be like, oh, I can see something I need to take out, and it has to do with my phone and Instagram. That's my current, biggest one, right? But it's like, I think that so many of us can relate on this level to that sentiment that it's like, we try to work around all these things by adding, but it really is removing the thing that's causing issues that is going to be the most powerful. So if someone is sort of with us so far and like, okay, I'm intrigued and I'm hearing that I don't have to have a problem to want to break up with alcohol or even just take a break, just experiment, spend some time apart, see what things would be. It feels like alcohol is so interwoven into the fabric of our lives because it is so present during so many social things. It's very ingrained in our culture. And I think a lot of fears come up, like certainly I related to the concept in your book that you talked about a lot, that I am not fun. That was a really hard one. So I think that, can you walk us through what do the early days without alcohol look like? What are some tips for people? What are some points that they really struggle with? And
Mhm.
how do we shift the mindset on that?
Yeah, totally. And I can certainly relate to that because I had those fears as well. And I think that the first thing that I would have someone doing trying to navigate those early days is to identify your personality type. In terms of, and I know, Danny, you're a really good person with Enneagram, so you might be able to give some Enneagram lessons behind this. But, for me, I was really stubborn in my early days. So I took a different path than someone who maybe has a little bit more of an impressionable with resolve. And so I'm going to give some different ideas for both of those types of people. So if you're like me and you're stubborn and you are just ready to dig in your heels and kind of give an FU to society around alcohol, like for me, I had stopped drinking and a whole bunch of my friends had committed to doing dry January as well. And I saw them slowly like falling off the wagon and oh, I'm going to have a cheat day or, oh, just for this weekend. I'm like, it's 30 days, yo. Like, you can't make it 30 days. And that hadn't been my mentality before, but this time I wanted it really at a different level. And so I dug in my heels and I was like, I'm going to see this thing through. Like, watch me be the champion at the end of this. And so I was just super stubborn. And if you are to the point where you're feeling really stubborn about it, you can maybe do some things that other people who aren't so stubborn wouldn't do. So for me, my goal was to prove to myself that I could still be fun and have fun without alcohol. And also to understand what fun looked like for me, because the reality is that if you've been numbing yourself through situations, a lot of the things that you found to be fun in the past probably aren't that fun. You were just making your brain dumb so that you could tolerate them. So how you learn to do that is you go out and you try to do things that you used to do drinking and let yourself figure out, do I enjoy this or is it just not fun? Now, why this is good for a stubborn person is because you're going to start to see clearly what things that are no longer a fit for you. And you'll be able to just say, okay, I'm going to leave. Okay, this isn't fun. I'm going to go, and give yourself the permission to go to the party, go to the event, go to the shindig, and just leave. If it's not fun, cool. Now you know. Now, on the other end of the spectrum are the people who maybe are a little bit more impressionable. Peer pressure is something that you fall victim to very easily, or you're feeling a little shaky or a little anxious. For those people, I would tell you that it's okay to opt out just for now, not forever, just for now as you strengthen your own self-esteem and your own tools. Just don't go. If you have made a commitment to yourself, that commitment is number one. So if that means that you have to back out of a couple social obligations in order to stick to that commitment, do it. And then as you start to build that self-confidence muscle, then you can start doing what I advise to the people in group one, which is going out and seeing, okay, do I like this or not? And if it's a no, you just leave and you decide not to do that anymore. And I think that those two approaches give some tools and insights for the different types of people who might be giving up alcohol.
Yeah, those are great. And honestly, I see so much crossover with what I teach with
Mhm.
sugar and like
Yeah.
people's relationship with sugar and
Mhm.
carbohydrates. There's those people who are abstainers and they're like, I'm just gonna, that's it. I can't do any, I can't moderate. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna go all in. And they're
Mhm.
like, they made up their mind and that feels easy for them. And then there's other
Mhm.
people where it's like, it's really hard for me to stay consistent with this. I'm really tempted by like my partner's candy drawer and all these things. So
Mhm.
if you know thyself, like that in I used to do a lot of acro yoga and we always used to talk about accurate self-assessment, and that self-assessment, taking inventory of like, can I go out and not be peer pressured into having a drink, and
Mhm.
or indulging in dessert when everybody inevitably gets dessert. Like, these are the things that we are faced with on a regular basis. And so if you know that you are like, I'm not going to be strong enough to say no, then you can opt out of going. And I think
Yeah.
that's great. And you talked about in the book, like, if it's not fun without alcohol, maybe it's just not fun. And
Mhm.
that was really helpful to hear because I just never considered that before. I always turned it inward on myself and said, oh, you're just not that fun. And that
Yeah.
felt really judgmental of myself. And I felt a lot of shame and around that. And it felt
Mhm.
really bad. And then when I read that, I was like, you know what? I am fun. I don't want to go out late and stand around a dive bar. That's just that. element that might be fun to some people, but that's not fun to me. And I can have fun doing other things. So is
Hmm.
this something that you recommend to people? Like, how do we find out what is fun for us? And what are some other ideas that don't involve alcohol that you'd recommend to people at the beginning or during any part of this
Mm.
journey?
Yeah. And Danny, I would imagine that a lot of people listening are a lot like you in that they, or like myself, that you are really intellectual, you're really capable, you're ambitious, you are high achieving, you're probably a little empathic. And those types of folks tend to do better in situations where you get to have deep connection. So think about it. If you've always been shuffled into these, like you said, dive bar situations where it's loud, it's crowded, it's rowdy, the acoustics and the vibe probably aren't that great, you've probably just been kind of like internally turned off because that's not what stimulates you, but you've been trying to go along with the social norm. And so, one of the tools that intellectuals and empaths use to make themselves fit in those scenarios, now this is completely subconscious, but we use alcohol because it helps us kind of just forget about all of those things that we don't like about the situation or that aren't fulfilling. And so, we're able to stick through something that's loud and doesn't circulate around true connection because we're zoned out. But when we actually check in and we try to do those things, we realize, wow, it's going to make me sound like a granny, but it's too loud in here. I can't have a conversation. And we thrive off of human connection. So if you're in a place where you're only able to shout at the top of your lungs, first of all, that's really just exhausting emotionally if you're doing it for a very long time. If the sound is bouncing off the walls, that is over engaging all of your senses. And then if you can only talk about celebrity gossip and the weather because it's so loud, you're not actually getting to connect with the people. So you're actually just unfulfilled. And what I would have you do is figure out what feels fulfilling to me. Like, one of the ways to do that, like, what are my love languages? Do I like to connect with one-on-one time? Do I like physical touch? What is it that I really enjoy? And how can I find ways to optimize for that kind of connection? So like you and I went on a walk. I love one-on-one connection. I love that time where I get to be in nature. I get to move my body and I get to have a great conversation. And so I choose to do things like that for fun more often than not. And of course, there are more, practical or not practical, like socially normalized ways to have fun, like doing things that are exciting and whatever that means to you. If that means going to I don't know, like a theme park or doing something that stimulates your body or gives you a rush or whatever that is for you, you can be so much more creative with what is fun once alcohol isn't the go-to, because going out for drinks requires zero mental creativity. And you will have to engage your creativity to figure out new fun things once you stop drinking. And for a while, it might feel impossible. But as your creative brain also starts to come back online, you're going to start to think of, oh, you know what I used to love to do? I don't know, I used to love this show. I'm completely making this up. Whose line is it anyway? It's a real show though.
I love that show.
And what if you go watch an improv show or take an improv class? If it's something that interested you ages ago that you enjoyed without drinking when you were a kid or a teenager, try and find a way to apply that to your adult life now. And those you're going to start seeing your creativity come back online, and you'll start to think of things that would actually be fun that aren't just drinking in a bar. And I think that's really cool that you can find new or old ways to engage yourself and do things that are actually fulfilling and stimulating to you.
Yeah, I love that. Those are such great ideas. And I love how also you recommended in the book things like you said, going for a walk and
Hmm.
even just going to a coffee shop, because those are places that are naturally sort of set up for you to
Hmm.
be connecting and talking to other
Yes.
people. So thinking that connection piece has really got me thinking of like, oh, that is right. Like we do want to
Uh-huh.
connect with other people, and what can I do to connect with someone else? And
Hmm.
sometimes it's like going to a gym class together and then going for, like going for coffee after, but whatever it
Hmm.
is. And it's like all these daytime activities that we forget about. And then a lot of us, especially, people here on my channel and my podcast, we're on this health journey. We're not trying to stay out super late, and that's not
Yes.
everybody. But sometimes it's like, where are those, like, 5 p.m. dinner reservations?
Uh-huh.
That's my love language, is a 5
Yes,
p.m.
me
dinner
too.
reservation
Me
for
too.
sure. I love it. No one's there. Sometimes you don't even need to like make a reservation. You get home early, get in your pajamas, cuddle up. Like that's my jam for sure. So these are such great ideas for things to do that are alcohol-free options. But what about when it comes to bridging conversations and like how other people are going to react? Because it might all be fine, like we might decide all this and then we think about, maybe telling a significant other or I know telling a certain family member of mine, it's very confronting to them that my decision to stop drinking and even meeting new people, if we're single, dating, like how I know that's like a huge question, but can you walk us through like how to start bridging this conversation with some other people and some stuff that comes up for people in your community?
Oh, for sure. And again, I'm going to give you two different paths and reminders to keep in mind, because this is one of the biggest fears that we use to talk ourselves out of making a change. Because what if this is really hard? What if I don't know what to say? What if people judge me? And so I want to remind you that, first of all, people care a lot less about what you're doing than you imagine. And we have this like secret self-centered part of ourselves that wants to believe that if we make a change, that everyone is going to have something to say about it. And fortunately and unfortunately, that's not true. People care a lot less about what you're doing with your body than you give them credit for. And a lot of times people won't even notice. Now, the people who do notice and who do care and who do say something, that's about them. That's not about you. And yet it can really feel about you, because most of the times when people present that, it comes off as judgment, because that's the only thing they know how to do. So I want to offer a couple of different reminders for when you're in that conversation that feels like the person is going to judge you, kind of like you said, a family member who, makes it out to be like, oh, why are you not doing that? Because it's probably them feeling, oh, because you don't do it, you're not saying this, but that means I shouldn't do it either, or you think I shouldn't do it, so I think you're judging me. And instead of having a conversation about that, I'm just going to throw it back at you. I'm going to hot potato that judgment back at you so I don't have to feel uncomfortable as a person receiving this information. So what I want you to remember is, if you are having this conversation, is that your actions and your vibrations speak louder than your words. So you can say a lot less than you think you need to say. And it's all about your approach. So if you approach the conversation about not drinking with kind of a fearful or like an Eeyore attitude, that you just are kind of acting like a really, really negative and as if it's a big problem, or you're trying to downplay its importance, what you're going to do is then give the other person permission to nag at you, to say, oh, well, just have one then. If you don't want to be doing this, or if it's so miserable, or if it's so hard, you don't have to do it. So instead, what I would have you do is get a really short and sweet script together and create a conversation that is non-negotiable, that leaves no room for question in it. And so that means that you have to tell the truth, and that you have to tell a truth that's non-negotiable. So a lot of people try to shake out of it with, like even for just people in your community, oh, I'm trying not to eat sugar right now, or I'm trying not to do this. Well, that you're trying, you're not doing it, right? And so you have to be really solid in that. And so I would say something like, I'm not drinking for the next 3 months, or I'm not drinking through the end of the month because I don't like the way it makes me feel and I want to feel better. And that is non-negotiable. The way you feel, your feelings aren't up for negotiation. And anyone who tries to negotiate with, oh, just have one, or one won't hurt, or everything in moderation, they do not have your best interest at heart. And that doesn't mean that that person is like out to get you or something like that. It just means that they don't understand at this point. And so I want you to go into a conversation with confidence, with certainty, and just say, hey, I'm not drinking right now. I'm not drinking for whatever time period. And because I don't like the way it makes me feel and I want to feel good, or whatever the simplest truth is for you. But if you use something that's, oh, I'm trying to eat healthier, or I'm driving in the morning, or I have to get up early, people will find a way to slip in through that. So I just want it to be cut and dry, very clear. And if someone does bite back at you, or does, try to negotiate, it's okay just to have a boundary, set a boundary and say, hey, this isn't up for conversation right now. I'm happy to talk about it with you at a different date, but let's table it for right now, and just squelch the conversation, set a boundary, and move on about your ways.
Yeah, that is such good languaging to have these scripts and to
Hmm.
set these
Hmm.
clear boundaries and going in ahead of time, practicing ahead of time. And this is with alcohol or with anything that you're,
Yeah.
not doing, right? Super, super helpful. So if we're setting this boundary, what about, some stuff that comes up for people like who are on the dating scene, right? So
Hmm.
I know
Hmm.
that, there's probably some single people listening to this podcast. And I know that's a lot of what you teach in your audience. It's like, how do we date without alcohol? Like,
Hmm.
we talked about some places you can go, but we're not going to like go out for a drink. That's not going to be available to us. And how do we approach the conversation with new people we meet? Because for me, what would come up immediately is that I automatically think that they're going to judge me. And
Hmm.
so it's like I might try to not say something. Like, how do we navigate that?
Oh, this is such a big conversation. And I've been single a really big or dating a large portion of my alcohol free life. So this is something, and I actually didn't date before I started drinking. So all of my dating experience was from the time that I started drinking forward. So I'm very qualified to have this conversation because I had to figure it out myself and it was really scary. And I'll skip past all of the things that I did quote unquote wrong and tell you what I finally landed on that felt really good. And that is that I stopped going on meeting for drink dates. I realized that I was really wanting, kind of like we were talking about in the social aspect, human connection. And human connection is built through vulnerability, it's built through conversation, it's built through being on the same page. And if you're not drinking, but the other person is, they're not going to be on the same intellectual, emotional, and spiritual plane as you. They are not going to be able to be fully vulnerable. And if this is your person sitting across the table from you or whatever, you want to be able to get to know them on that level. And so I think it's just that drinking dates are unproductive and that yeah, it seems like a great way to like loosen up a little bit. But at the end of the day, you're doing yourself a disservice because you're going to be on a different level as that person. And a lot of dates where you meet for drinks are going to happen in those louder, rowdy environments where it's difficult to connect. And so instead, what I would have someone out on the dating scene do is to um, kind of manipulate the situation. And you can say that you're doing this or you cannot, but I just don't meet for drinks anymore. And I'm very upfront as to why. I say, hey, like if someone were to ask me on a date and say, "Hey, would you like to meet for drinks on Thursday?" I would say, "Hey, I actually don't drink anymore. I don't mind if you do, but I'd be more comfortable if we went on a walk or grabbed a coffee. Would you be open for that?" And so if someone presents me with that option, instead of just saying no, I don't drink, it's like swatting them away. And if I want to meet with them, I will say, yes, I would like to meet with you. I don't want to do what you just said. And here's why. And here's another option. Will you go for that? So I'm kind of just volleying it back to them with another option. And almost every time the person has said yes. I can only think of one time ever when the person has said no. And that's really important because that person drinking was a really important part of their lifestyle. And that wouldn't be a good match for me long term. So I've just had to get really mindful about if a person isn't cool with not meeting for drinks, then it's probably not my person. And I don't want to spend time with them anyway. So those are kind of some of the perspectives I would give you. And yeah, it did take me a while to get to it because at first I did want to be the cool girl who just like, would go out and not drink. But then I realized that most of the people I was meeting up with were like Peter Pan F boys and they weren't good matches for me anyway. And so I had to up level what my standards were. And that included setting some boundaries in dating as well, not only with myself, but with my potential partner. And I've had such a better experience dating because I was willing to set those boundaries and be honest.
Oh, I love that. That's super,
Hmm.
super helpful. And so, what about with people who already know us?
Hmm.
When I stopped drinking, my wife was very kind. She's never
Hmm.
encouraged me to have a drink. Like,
Hmm.
with people in your community, do you find that there's pushback from people
Hmm.
or that there's some sort of like sabotaging going on? Like
Yeah.
what could this look like for people and what might some people expect so we know, how to bridge this gap or have these conversations?
Yeah, there are infinite possibilities, but the possibility that we always seem to like fear spiral into is that our friends are going to reject us and that we're going to be kicked to the curb and we'll be unfriendable and we'll be all alone, or we'll be, our romantic partner will reject us. And typically that doesn't happen. Okay. That's now, depending upon where you are in life, maybe you have a little bit of a more intense party crew. So here's what I want to open you up to. One is the possibility that your friendships can switch context and they can grow and evolve with you. Now, that doesn't mean that your friends are going to stop drinking, because they probably won't. Some of them might, because you give them a permission slip. But more often than not, what's going to happen is you're going to have to put in some effort to those friendships to help that context switch. And what I mean by that is, if you were people who always went out and drank on, my friends and I used to go to this thing called Margarita Friday. And it was an event that we created where we went to a Mexican restaurant and drank margaritas. It wasn't rocket science. But I realized that if I wanted to stay friends with some of the people in that group, Margarita Friday wasn't quite the place to do it. So I needed to invite them to switch the context. So just like with a date, I would invite them to coffee. I would invite them to breakfast. I would invite them on a hike. I would invite them to lunch. And as I started doing these experiments, I started to see and understand more clearly who I was an authentic match for friendship-wise and who I just was friends with because we had drinking in common. And so it also helped me to see, here are the friendships that I actually want to keep putting energy into, and here are some that maybe I'm going to take a step back from. So I want you to remember that you have the power to control the context, but that you probably are going to have to make the invitation. Your friendships aren't doomed for failure, but it is going to require some effort on your part, because remember, if your friends are stuck in the drinking cycle, most of their creative capacities to know what to do is pretty limited to, let's meet for drinks, let's go do this drinking activity. So you're going to have to be the one to take the creative initiative and offer some other suggestions. Now, the other thing that could happen is you could realize that some of them aren't coming along for the ride. They're perfectly happy where they're at in their, social drinking or drinking whatever kind of lifestyle. And that's okay too. That doesn't say anything about you. It's just a reminder that we grow and evolve. And so you might outgrow some of your friendships, and that's okay, because I promise you, there are like-minded people around you who you have just not yet met because you've had your blinders on. You've been stuck in this one way of being. And so all you keep seeing are more people that reaffirm that everyone drinks. And once you open up your field of vision to see that that's not true, you are going to see people who were right next to you the entire time, who you were sitting next to at yoga class for months and months on end, who you were walking past at your local coffee shop every single day, and you just weren't attracted to them because your blinders were on. And now all of a sudden, you're going to be attracted to one another. And so people are going to magically come into your life. Now, you have to leave your house. That's a trick. You do have to leave your house. But people are going to come into your life that are going to support and celebrate this new way of being. And you just have to be patient and also make room for them.
That is so good. And I definitely relate to some of those things where friendships, it felt harder to connect. And I didn't have that just, let's all drink. And that was a little hard for me. And here in Austin, I did move, and here in Austin, most of the people I meet actually don't drink. So it feels easy, because it feels like, there's already like a lifestyle and a social, calendar that is set up where drinking isn't involved. And just for anyone who doesn't live in Austin, it's possible that there are things, and sometimes you need to be that, be the change, be the person to be like, instead of doing Margarita Fridays, let's do like a workout class and then brunch, change it, just swap the activity. And I think that's so, so good. So a lot of the words that I'm hearing you say and the themes that I'm hearing about alcohol, which maybe we should have talked about at the beginning, but it's all good. It's that, like, I'm hearing clarity, authenticity versus like creativity, like all these positive words without alcohol. And then with the alcohol, it's like watered down and, fuzzy or inauthentic or just different things. Like, what is it that alcohol does to us on this sort of spiritual, social level? Because, another podcast will talk about what it does inside your body. So not
Mhm.
physically, but what are the things that alcohol does to us in this way, and especially with our emotions? I think that's a really
Mhm.
important one to touch on.
Yeah. So alcohol, on the base level, it just causes you to settle for good enough. And that's good enough spiritually, that's good enough emotionally, that's good enough professionally, that's good enough socially, that's good enough romantically. And I know that when I was drinking, my life looked good enough. I was checking all the boxes, I was doing all of the things I was told I was supposed to do. But good enough at the end of the day is mundane, it's mediocre. And you deserve so much more than that. And that's not to say that other people who are settling for good enough are bad or wrong or stupid or evil. But if you are feeling and you're resonating with this idea that you are worthy and deserving of and you desire more than good enough, then removing something, that lowers your energetic vibration, which I'll explain a little bit more, is going to help you strive for great, amazing, your highest potential. And what we do, what we get emotionally when and spiritually when we drink alcohol is we water ourselves down. We dilute ourselves and say, I'm not worthy of experiencing a life that is full, a life that is full range. I only am going to experience this one thing that's a little dulled down, that's a little fuzzy, because that's all I feel I'm worthy of. So, on the emotional level, we have emotions that range from like elation and joy and true happiness to like really heavy emotions that are grief and sadness and depression and heartbreak. But what we do when we drink alcohol is we kind of just put ourselves in the middle. We flatline ourselves so that maybe we get a little bit of happiness and maybe we get a little bit of sadness, but we never get to fully experience our life at both ends of the spectrum. And if you want to be a fully embodied human, you have to, I think the ones that we struggle with the most and that we avoid are those feelings of grief and heartache and frustration and anger. But if you don't let those come out, what happens is, again, you flatline. So then you actually don't get to experience the really high emotions like joy and happiness and love at the level that you're worthy of and deserving of. And, Brene Brown, she has this a saying that if you dull the dark, you dull the light. And that's what we're doing when we drink, if you're doing it at any consistent level. And unfortunately, because it's become so normalized, most of us do drink at a pretty consistent level, whether that's a glass of wine every day or several glasses of whatever on the weekends. If you are consistently putting this substance in your body, you are diluting yourself. You're dulling the dark and you're dulling the light, and therefore you're not getting to have a fully embodied human experience. And you're deserving of that, even at the times when it's hard. And I think that as someone who definitely avoided the hard feelings years ago, I can tell you that they aren't nearly as hard and insurmountable as I made them. It's like I'm trying to think of some sort of, I'm not like a roller coaster person, but I could imagine that if you are afraid to go on a roller coaster and then you do it, and you're just like, oh, well, that wasn't so bad. It's kind of how it is with big emotions. Like they feel like a big dip, but it's not as bad as you thought. And once you get used to it, you are so much more capable of handling those big emotions, be they really heavy or really bright and positive. And I think you owe that to yourself. I think that having that experience is just so beautiful and magnificent that I would want that for everyone. And I know it sounds a little Pollyanna and like rose colored glasses, but it's worked out pretty well for me. And so I want that for other people too.
Yeah, I love that. And it's such a beautiful message and a great reminder that it's not only the physical that
Mm-hmm.
like alcohol is messing with. And
Mm-hmm.
like we certainly know that the physical piece is there. We've all woken up, the next day, potentially a blood sugar crash in the middle of the night that wakes us
Mm-hmm.
up with a pounding heart. And the next day we feel extra anxious and all these things. But the idea that it's it's limiting you in so many ways from feeling all your emotions, not
Mm-hmm.
just, it doesn't just selectively numb the bad ones, it also mutes those good ones. And so we're living in this
Mm-hmm.
just like muted world of, just hovering in the middle, that good enoughness. And I love that. So, really great takeaways there. So, I feel a lot of people who are, again, all these parallels with sugar are coming
Mm-hmm.
up for me. And I noticed that one of the biggest hurdles for a lot of my clients is self sabotage.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering how this sort of showed up and how you help people with this type of thing when it comes to choosing to be alcohol free, because it's not always as easy as, for me, sometimes I just make a decision and the decision is made. I get that from my
Uh-huh.
mom. My
Yep.
grandma was like that, but I realize that not everyone is like that. So,
Yep.
can you talk about the self-sabotage piece? Does that come
Mm-hmm.
up with
Yeah.
people?
And I'm like that too, in the sense that once I made the decision, but here's what I forget. And my one of my mentors reminded me of that, was like, Amanda, remember all the times though that you hemmed and hawed before that you were self-sabotaging because you were 1 foot in and 1 foot out, and you didn't
Mm.
just make the decision, because there certainly was about a year in time where I wasn't being stubborn and I was self-sabotaging because I knew ultimately what I wanted to do, but I kept like making excuses for like, oh, well, I'll do that when, or I'll start at the first of the month or the first of the year, or after I get through vacation or wedding season. And I always had an excuse, and there will always be an excuse to drink. And ultimately, from a spiritual perspective, I believe that we have these two internal voices, and one is the voice of the ego. And if you watched like old timey, like Looney Tunes cartoons, you'll remember like the little devil on your shoulder, like telling you to do like bad things, and the little angel on your shoulder, and how they were like always competing. And the voice of the ego is that little devil on your shoulder that sounds really rational and really seductive, and like, oh, this won't matter. It's only once, or everything in moderation. And that little voice, though, is there because it wants to keep you small. It wants to keep you stuck. Ultimately, the ego thrives on your smallness, and it doesn't want you to reach your potential, because then you outgrow it and it doesn't get to be around anymore. The voice doesn't get to talk. And the other voice, the voice of your inner guide or your intuition, that's the voice that wants you to achieve and wants you to strive and live at your fullest. And that voice is so quiet and so soft. And sometimes it's so easy to tone it out or not hear it because it sounds almost too good to be true. And what I want you to know, that if you are someone who is hearing those self-sabotage messages, and sometimes they're so subtle, it is the, oh, just have one, or oh, this is a special occasion, or oh, you can start again on Monday, or oh, you had a tough day, you deserve this, or you need this to get through this social situation, this baby shower or whatever is so boring, you couldn't possibly do it without a drink. They're like seemingly kind of innocent messages, but they are always there to keep you stuck and keep you small, because you know that at the end of the day, if you have that, I started to become so sensitive that if I even had just one drink, that I felt really groggy and really just disconnected at the next day, and that didn't feel good. So I no longer wanted to just have one. I wanted to have none, but that voice kept like piping up. You could do it. You could do it. And yeah, you could, but you have to be in that moment. You have to have a little bit of resolve and say, nope, my future self wants to feel good. And I know that this is not going to help. And so I just want you to recognize that voice of self-sabotage for what it is. And it's a little voice trying to keep you stuck where you are. And you deserve to soar. You don't deserve to be stuck and tethered to this past identity. And so I just want to encourage you to recognize what it is. And sometimes just recognizing our own BS will be enough to help us get out of our own way.
Yeah, so good.
Mhm.
And so good with all those real life examples of what we actually might say. Like
Mhm.
and we've all heard those before. None of those sound
Yeah.
far-fetched. And it's like, oh yeah, I would totally have said that to myself, like
Uh-huh.
for sure. So those are really, really helpful. And that's a lot of what's in the book. It just makes everything so grounded in reality. And you're
Mhm.
giving us such real life things that you have thought or that are coming up for other people, and
Mhm.
making this very practical and very like grounded in our reality, and not like, oh well, that would work for someone else. And it's all of a sudden it opens us up to this idea of like, oh my goodness, this is actually possible for me. Because
Mhm.
before I went alcohol free, I never thought it was a possibility because of just all these different reasons. And I used to say to myself, like, good thing I don't have a problem with alcohol because I would never want to
Mhm.
stop. And like, I just had all these weird things. So, it's all the work that you're doing is so, so helpful. And just to kind of close, what do you see as some potential, mistakes people might make, or just sort of touch points where we might say like, look out for this or this.
Mhm.
I don't know. Anything coming up for you there? Okay.
Totally. So I call these like potential stumbling blocks because there are these little tricks that we play on ourselves that we usually do it right when things are about to get good, right when we've gained momentum. That little voice will come back in and trip us up. And so those are things like, okay, well, you made it this far, you deserve to celebrate. Or you made it this far, that means you can control this and you should test the waters. And so it's these little temptations. And what I will compare it to that I think everyone can relate to, whether it's in your own life or the life of a really close friend, is when you break up with a person who, like romantically, who, they're not like abusive or bad, but they're just not a good fit. Let's even say it's for your friend. If you see your friend go through a breakup with someone who you've just been like, oh, finally that guy is out of the picture or that girl's out of the picture because they just weren't right for you. And then you see your friend start to do this dance. Well, like, oh, I haven't talked to them in a couple weeks. I should see what they're doing. I should check in on their social media, or I'm just going to text them and see what's going on. You would say to them, no. No, no, no. Friend, you need to go. No contact. Delete them from your social media. Do not talk to them. If they message you, do not message back. Block them. You need some time away. And so that's the same thing for alcohol. You actually need, and too, with a breakup, that at some point, boom, you have a turning point and you stop thinking about that person. Maybe you've moved on and found someone new, or maybe you've worked on yourself and found your self-worth. But once that period hits, it feels really good because then you could walk by that person on the street and they could be looking smoking hot. And you would just be like, oh, there's so-and-so. And that's where you need to let yourself get to with alcohol. If you're still kind of like lusting over it or wondering if you can have a little fling or say hi or just have one, those are really dangerous conversations. And I need you to be your internal best friend and be like, no, stop, don't do that. Like slap your own hand and say, no, you need to, your break, you have not quite yet been on a break that's long enough. Keep going. Because what's really powerful is when you get to the point that you think of alcohol and then you're just like, oh, not interested. And from that point, that's the point of power. And that's the only point where I would tell you, maybe now it's okay to re-engage. But at that point, it's so a non-thing to you. It's so, I wouldn't even say maybe unattractive. It's just not something you're lusting over anymore. So from that point, if I tell you, okay, well, now you can have it. If you want it, now you can have it. Most of the time you'll just say no because you feel so rooted in your confidence in this new lifestyle. And that's where I would want anyone to get to a point where they're feeling really rooted. And it's not I have to hate this person or avoid this person or this substance, but I'm just okay without it. It's okay. We could be in the same room together and it's no big deal. And that's a really powerful place to be. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that's so good. And that is actually where I feel like I am personally. So I feel like I ask myself almost every time I go out, like, oh, do you want a drink? Because I still do go out sometimes with, either to a restaurant or somewhere where people are drinking. And it's like, oh, do you want a drink? And I'm like, no. I just, it's interesting. I check in with myself and I just don't want it because, for
and it's
my
just
own
like if
reasons.
I asked you, hey,
and
do you
that
want to
feels
text
like
your
a really
ex
good
from
place
5
to
years
be
ago right
because
now?
I don't feel
And you're not like,
I am
no, but you're just
forcing
like, no.
anything. What did you say? I'm sorry, it cut out.
Oh yeah, sorry. I don't know if it's recording separately for us, but it's just like, I think that's such a powerful place to be where you just don't want to, and you can be around it and you can say this powerful, like, no, that doesn't have any emotion behind it.
Yes, exactly. So Amanda, tell us who you work with, how you help people, and where we can get in touch with you, learn more, your book, your podcast, everything.
Yeah, so I work with and support primarily ambitious women who are soul-centered, who are wanting to expand into their potential, whatever that looks like for you. And so the work that I do isn't just about giving up alcohol. It's about helping you expand into that potential. And so the book I wrote is called Unbottled Potential. You can get it right now wherever books are sold in any format. There it is. And you can also catch up with me. I have a podcast of the same name, Unbottled Potential, or I'm everywhere on the internet at Amanda Kuda.
Awesome. I will link everything in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing your wisdom and making this all feel possible, taking the scariness out of it and giving us really great actionable tips for going alcohol free, experimenting with it, or even just playing with it in your mind if this is the first time you've thought of it. Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so grateful.